Hi, this is Lisa from Two Bridges Art Academy, and today I'm going to do a very quick landscape study using gouache. And so I'm going to jump right in, and gouache needs to be layered. So if you're new to gouache, just think about layering as your primary source of applying the material. For a sky, we usually do a very light wet into wet wash in the beginning. Wash is actually meant to be opaque, but when you're doing a sky, obviously, you want to make it look light and like a sky kind of is. And so the best technique for that is to do wet your paper, do a little wet into wet, and then you can start to add in your darker colors. Um, and the sky that I am looking at doing here is going to be a little bit darker, some interesting clouds rolling in. And so, just like you would with a watercolor, you're just going to apply some of that color. I'm going to throw in pink down here. And I've sketched in my drawing. So I have uh, my roadmap, my guideline, so to speak, for what I'm looking to achieve in this painting. Um, this is, again, it's a study. I'm not going to go super detailed in kind of what I do, but looking to kind of capture the essence of my drawing. Now, in order to get my white for my clouds, there's two ways you can do it. You can remove some of the paint. Oops, that paintbrush has some green on it. You can remove some of the paint like this with a brush, or you could actually dab it while it's still wet with paper towel. So I'm going to do a little bit of dabbing there, and then a little bit of dabbing here, kind of on the top side of my cloud to get my white, and then I'll go back in and reinforce with some white gouache. But if you've used gouache before, or if you're new to it, um, you will certainly learn that it's hard to get a pure white, because once you apply paint down, that kind of is it stains the paper, so to speak. So I'm going to just leave these right here, and then I'll go back in once it's dry. Now, for the rest of my painting, you want your gouache to be fairly opaque consistency. You want to layer. So I would call it a semi-opaque would be my first layer, and then I would go back in with a more opaque consistency. So right here, I'm just getting some darkness for my trees in the background, and looking for them to be, again, fairly opaque, but not the most opaque. So a little bit of water added in. Then I'm just going to go in and I'm going to start to establish kind of my tree line here. I'm not going to get super fussy about my tree line because I will go back in after and I will add in some tree tops with a smaller brush. I'm using a flat brush, and for gouache, synthetic brushes are the best because it allows you to control the amount of water that you have, and that's kind of the key with a gouache is making sure that you can control the water. So adding a little bit there. So kind of with any painting that where you go dark to light, which is absolutely what you do with a gouache, you want to just kind of establish your dark areas first. So adding in some blue here. And again, I will reestablish the color going over with some green, but this consistency again on a, if we were to do kind of a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being most opaque, this is about a 3. It still looks like a watercolor. It looks like a more opaque watercolor. And then we'll go back in and we'll add in a little bit more of our dark tones. With gouache too, when you add too much water, when you add any water, you are diluting the pigment. So you want to make sure that you're not diluting the pigment too much with water. And how we do that is we actually use a lot of white. So oftentimes when you buy a gouache set, you're going to realize that it actually has a larger tube of white. And the reason for that is you use your white a lot. I love gouache. I think it's an amazing medium. That said, it's a finicky medium. So if you don't know how to control the paint, it's possible you might get frustrated. But there are just, a few tips and tricks with it. And the first one is to have a little bit of patience with it. You have to allow things to dry before you start to layer on. The good thing is that gouache dries super fast. And that can be a frustrating part of gouache, is that your palette might constantly need water or a spray to it because everything is drying so quickly. Okay, so I've established some of what I'll call my baseline areas, my darks, my different values. Now I'm going to start to go in and I'm mixing some green up here, and I'm going to start to layer. This painting is pretty dry. There are areas that aren't so dry, but I'm going to work around those, and that's why with gouache, you really want to move around your painting and kind of start attacking the dry areas first, and then you can work your dark areas, or the areas that you've already painted that might have been wet. But again, it does not take very long for this stuff to dry. Now you can see here, my paint consistency is definitely more opaque than that first watercolory layer that you see here. Now I'm actually going in with a much more opaque green tone here right now. It's my green tone, but I want to make sure that I'm getting the most pigment and most value, and you're going to do that when it's most opaque. If you're coming from using watercolor, I think I've seen a lot of watercolorists start using gouache painting as a watercolor. I'm not saying that's wrong, because there's never anything wrong in art in my mind, but the real value of using gouache is getting just these really rich, opaque, and it's a matte finish that ends up happening, which can be just really, really beautiful. So again, just kind of layering, thinking about my tonal values, making sure I have that good balance of light, mid, and my dark values. And I will establish my lightest lights and my darkest darks at the very end of my painting. Right now, it's really kind of mostly working in that mid-tone range, and kind of establishing the painting itself. And then I'll go back in. And you can leave some of this, the value of kind of doing this, why I did this blue underneath, is because I'm going to leave some of it. And this is what will end up also kind of creating some texture in your painting. That's my, my darkest value. And I'll probably go in and add a little bit more of that darkness. But this edge here that I'm seeing is just a little bit darker. Gouache can reactivate when it's wet, meaning if I put a layer down and it's very, very opaque and very thick, and then I put another layer on top of it, that bottom layer most likely is going to start to come up and reactivate. It's called reactivation. Now, there's times where that actually might be something that you're looking to do. But if you're not looking to do that, that's where you have to make sure that you're doing your more transparent layers on the bottom and then adding your opaque layers in. Otherwise, you're going to have challenges with reactivation. See, on this side here, the side slope, I'm doing a little bit of dry brush, but also just leaving that brown underneath to show through, not fully. And again, I will go in and add some more of my darker values. And I think gouache is a medium that is underrated. I think a lot of people love to do watercolor. I mean, I love to do watercolor as well. But gouache is actually a great medium to, if you're going to paint in plein air, then you can actually bring gouache. And that's a nice way to use gouache in a quick landscape study. The masters used to use gouache as kind of their study medium, right? Before they went and did a painting, a lot of them would use gouache, but then it became more of a medium that people realized had a lot of value onto itself. And I feel like gouache is like having a moment right now. Maybe it's just me, because I'm loving gouache, but I'm seeing a lot more things online about using gouache, and I think it's really becoming a lot more of a mainstream medium, which I love to see. So as you can see here, the paint that I'm using is fairly opaque, and now I'm really starting to, the painting is starting to come to light and become something. As with every painting that we do, it can be very frustrating in the beginning because you're putting a lot of paint down. Sometimes it looks like nothing. This is where patience comes in, and Just trust the process, trust the layering process. Now I am going to, for this is like a gravelly sort of road. Got a little purplish here. Actually, I think I want to make it a little bit more purple in the beginning, and then I can go over it. When I paint, if I'm outside, or if I'm using a reference photo, I'm using that photo just as a reference, as a guide. I am never worried about creating something that is exactly like what the photo is. And that is my style. I think, some people are more hyper realistic. My goal when I paint, well, I usually have a few goals, and it's always important to have a goal when you paint. Sometimes I'm painting just because I want some relaxation, and it's very relaxing for me to paint. But I want to create something that is visually appealing. So if it's not looking exactly like what I took a photo of or what's in front of me, I'm okay with that, because my goal is to create something that is first and foremost appealing to me, and then secondarily, maybe something that is visually appealing to others, but I want to feel good about what I've created. And if something is, I don't know, in a scene and it's not helping with the composition, it's okay to do your own thing with it. So never worry about that. I don't get concerned about sticking to exact colors. I think oftentimes, especially when we take a photograph, there's no way you're going to get the colors. If you've ever tried to take a photo of a sunset, because it's like so beautiful, and then you look at it and you say, it doesn't look like anything like it. Keep that in mind when you're actually working from photographs. Like, it's okay to take some artistic liberties, because if you're working from a photograph, you're not actually looking at what was potentially there to begin with. There are trees back here that I'm actually just giving very lightly the illusion of trees. I'm not going to worry about the details of the trees. I will get some more definition on the top of those trees though, because I think that will be an important focal point. Okay, so I am going, I think what I'll do next is get this pathway a more opaque. And when you're working with gouache, you will realize that your paint will dry so fast on your palette. So don't mix a ton of it, because it's just going to dry. Can you spritz it? For sure. Just keep in mind, every time you spritz it, you are reducing the opacity of your paint. And not just the opacity, but also the pigmentation. Right, so you're going to have a less vibrant painting because you've added water to it. So that first layer was on a scale of 1 to 5, it was kind of like a 3. This layer here, it's more like a 4, 4.5. I'm going to go back one more time with a lighter color and a fairly opaque. So synthetic, you'll see I use a flat brush. And I've used this big flat brush for pretty much the entire painting. Potentially go to a smaller brush when I do those trees in the back. But keep in mind, you can use any brush you want. I think using a flat brush makes us a little bit looser and also um, allows for some interesting shapes to happen. You're not pushing it as much or controlling it as much, which will give you interesting shapes. The reason why I'm going to switch to my smaller brush for these trees. So the reason why we use a synthetic brush versus a watercolor sort of brush is because we want to be able to control the amount of water. Again, with gouache, it's really about that kind of control of how much water do you have and how much pigment you have. So here with the smaller brush, all I'm doing is lightly dabbing kind of, not all along the edge, but pieces of the edge to give the appearance of a more natural tree line versus what I had originally put down, right, which was just establishing that horizon line. And then it's pretty dark back here, but I'm going to start to add a little green, a little bit more greenish in, a little bit more tonal values. But already this right here looks more realistic than, nothing in nature is even. And so this little technique will just, and you could do this one, again, I'm a flat brush user, but this one, this technique you could actually use for the trees. You can use a round brush, a smaller round brush. I know a lot of people are more comfortable using a smaller round. Doing something like this, I happen to love these little guys that I have, and so I'm used to using them. And you're just doing like a little bit of dabbing, and again, occasionally add a little different value for that tree line. And the last thing I'm going to do is I am going to establish my lightest lights and my darkest darks. And so I think I've actually got a pretty decent value there for that background, that tree line. I've got some good darks in there, so I'm not really looking to mess with that very much. Right here, I've got a darker value that I want to establish. I've got a little bit darker value here that I want to establish. Actually, I'm going to throw some brown back here, even out my painting a little bit. The nice thing again about these flat brushes is just you can use them for straight lines, you can use them for large spaces, you can use the edge if you just want a little dab here and there. I don't like, maybe I'm lazy, but I don't like to change my brush too much when I'm painting. Okay, now I'm gonna go back in and get some lighter tones in there. And I'm going to start with this guy and just add some white here. Now what's interesting is this is white that I'm adding on here. And I think you'll see once it dries. So with gouache does not dry the same color. Lights will dry darker. So this, and it's a touch, right? So you will figure it out over time. But sometimes I'm amazed. I'm like adding white and I'm not seeing it. Like this looks very white going on, but you will see that this is going to dry much lighter. Okay, there's some whites there. I've got one more area of dark that I want to throw in. And that is, I just want to establish this darkness. Not the whole way through, but just a little bit here and there. Kind of the illusion of shadows within these trees. And then last but not least, I am actually going to, well, I was going to take, yeah, I'm going to use a round brush. And I'm going to add in the slightest hint of a fence. It's going to go right here. You know what? Stay true to yourself. I'm actually going to switch it up and I'm going to, yeah, I'm going to go with my smaller flat brush. I don't care if these fence posts are even, which by the way, they're not anyways, because it's kind of an old farm. The closer as they get further apart. Just something like that. And then I'll add a little bit of lightness to them. And there you have it. So that was about 28 minutes of a full landscape gouache painting. If you are interested in playing with gouache and learning more about it, please check out our website at twobridgesartacademy.com. We have a lot of different classes that use gouache and all kinds of other painting mediums. We would love to have you join us. So check us out. Thanks, everyone.